I first remember seeing the box art for this game at some random Mega Man website years ago. I don't recall the name of the website, and I shook my head in disbelief. The cover art, comprising several Mega Man illustrations that had been seemingly cut and pasted at random areas over a sterile black backdrop, seemed to make the original NES Mega Man's cover art look like a masterpiece in comparison. In my mind, there was no way this cover art could have been real. Sure enough, one of my friends had a copy of the game, and he confirmed the box art was as shown on the site. This is a strange entity, to be sure. For the most part, I wasn't remotely aware that there was a Mega Man for the Game Gear. I knew about the Wily Wars compilation on the Sega Genesis that was only available overseas, but I never saw this game sitting in stores or anywhere else for that matter. So this is a rare beast indeed. Few copies can be found on eBay if you're lucky, but they cost a pretty penny. But let's find out if the game's worth the money. So the story of Mega Man on the Game Gear is the same cut and paste storyline that's been prevalent on a number of classic Mega Man games. Dr. Wily's gone crazy with one of his plans to conquer the world, and it's up to Mega Man to stop him. I suppose the story works considering the content we're working with here, but outside of that it's nothing special, because in all honesty the story means nothing here since the game doesn't really actively do anything with it. For the most part, Mega Man's graphics are very nicely rendered, with everything being about the same resolution as on an NES screen. Well, kind of, sort of. Although the majority of the game's graphics are simply rips from the NES games, you could probably find some additional details in some of the stage designs and character sprites. The game seems a bit more colorful and vibrant compared to the NES original, so overall the game is visually good and a slight enhancement of what you'd find on the NES. Of course, there's the issue of the full-size graphics not being able to fit on a small Game Gear screen, but we'll get to that later. Mega Man has some of the most wonderful music you'll ever find in a video game, but none of it is featured in this game. Sound is often a major failing with the Sega Game Gear, and this game sadly is no exception. While you can theoretically churn out some decent tunes with the inferior audio hardware, it's been done, I know. It's pretty clear that Mega Man doesn't take that extra step, and as a result the game sounds horrendous, but with the awful sound effects and the butchered soundtrack, best to play this one with the volume turned all the way down, in my opinion. So now that we've discussed the graphics and sounds of Mega Man, let's get to the meat of the matter, the unoriginal gameplay. Even by Mega Man standards. Much like previous Mega Man titles, you have the ability to choose any of the 4 stages to play in any order. You fight through the levels, you face the Robot Master, you beat him, you acquire his weapon, and you use that weapon against another boss. Clearing all 4 bosses bring you to the Wily stages where you'll encounter 2 more Robot Masters and subsequently acquire their weapons as well, before the final showdown. Simple stuff, and it works rather well here. So judging from the visuals, longtime Mega Men, Mega Mans, Blue Bombers, whatever, will easily assume that the game based itself on Mega Man 5 for the NES, and you'd be right. But it's much more than that. Mega Man on the Game Gear is nothing more than a glorified cut and paste job of various levels from Mega Man 4 and 5 with the gameplay of 5, resulting in an interesting mishmash of elements from both games. Notably, you'll have the Mega Man 5 style Mega Buster, in which you charge your buster to shoot a bigger, stronger shot, get hit while charging and you'll lose your charge, mystery tanks, only one in the entire game, and the Mega Man 5 style Rush Coil adapter that isn't particularly useful. I would have preferred the classic Rush Coil that was used in the other games featuring the Rush Coil. Also, for some reason, you are only allowed 2 pellet shots on screen at a time as opposed to the usual 3 shots on screen, which is the case with most classic Mega Man games, even on the Game Boy titles. Whether that's due to a hardware limitation or simply an attempt at diversifying the gameplay, it certainly makes for a jarring change. The levels themselves are also straight rips from the NES games, so chances are if you played the older games, primarily Mega Man's 4 and 5 along with a dabble of Mega Man 2, you've already played the levels featured here, as they're exactly the same thing with some minute changes here and there. However, you're also faced with the added challenge of vertical scrolling due to the levels being far too small for the small Game Gear screen to fit in. That means you'll have to be extra careful as you'll never know if you'll land on a platform or a bed of spikes. While this doesn't really cripple the game, it does hurt it, and it makes me wonder why they couldn't just make a new game for the Game Gear like they did on the Game Boy. I certainly believe this to be possible. In any case, the gameplay is a tad slower than the NES originals or even the Game Boy titles, which are usually littered with slowdown, but it's an otherwise serviceable translation. For the most part, Mega Man is about as difficult as the games it's based on. While the vertical scrolling function does make it a tad more difficult than it should be, it becomes a moot point if you're even remotely familiar with those games, and the game shouldn't be too difficult as a result. In any case, US Gold is gracious enough to include a difficulty select similar in vein to the one featured in Mega Man 2 for the NES. Of course, they removed continues from the game. One game over and it's back to the title screen for you, but at the very least, they did add passwords so you could continue your progress, so they're not entirely heartless. As a novelty item, Mega Man is a rather interesting find that no doubt does its very best to maintain the traditional gameplay of the NES originals on Sega's Color handheld system. What the game lacks in sound and variety, it more than makes up for its good gameplay, graphical upgrades, and fair challenge. As much as this is a no-brainer for those with Game Gears wanting a dose of Mega Man, I wouldn't go far as to recommend you go out of your way to pick it up. Aside from the rarity of the game, Mega Man is nothing more than compilations of levels and elements from the old NES games that you might have already played. There's simply nothing unique or fresh about this game that warrants a playthrough unless you really want your dose of Mega Man on the Game Gear. Nonetheless, for those who still have Game Gears laying around and are Mega Man enthusiasts, this is probably an interesting novelty item worth picking up if you can find a copy at a respectable price range. But those looking for a brand new Mega Man to conquer should probably look elsewhere. I hear Mega Man 10's knocking.